We'll see if that works. So what we're talking about today, I'm Keenan Dungy, I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Institutional Effectiveness, and Don Long, Interim Assistant Director of Research Administration. Also here to help answer questions we have about the IRB, Human Research Protection Program, changes in the policy and procedures. And we've been working on this for a year. The feds have been working on it for 6 years, so we have some catch up to do. The main thing about today is the talking about the changes, proposed changes to the policy and how that's going to affect your research. And you can see that I stole a bunch of, I'm borrowing slides from the feds. And this will also change what informed consent looks like slightly. We've been following best practices, so our changes aren't significant there. Also want to talk about another change that happened last year, which is the European Union issued a data protection law that applies to anyone in the European Union area. So that affects the kinds of survey questions you can ask, for example, who you can ask them to. And then we'll have time for question and answer. I want to point out, so there's a handout that summarizes these changes. There's a city module. Actually, there's 6 modules on city that you can get free training on these changes. Also want to point out the Human Research Protection Program policy is in here under Institutional Review Board on our webpage. And I've been making a number of changes to the webpage to try to help you navigate to what you're interested in doing. Like if you have a protocol you think is exempt, there's a link to the exempt protocol application. Policies are here. So I've created a box folder which you can access with your U of I UIS account that has a number of the proposed changes, and you're welcome to I think you can post comments or just email me directly or email ora@uis.edu if you have suggestion changes. The policy is right here. It's from 2012, so we have a number of changes. I was at a workshop last week. University of Kentucky presented, or a presenter from the University of Kentucky, and they have a staff person that tracks changes at the federal level that affect human subjects research, and they're just listing the changes, listing the laws or rules or guidelines that affect changes since 2012 is 49 pages long. So our ability to get in compliance in one go is we're going to make an effort. But and just to warn you, if you want to print out the policy, I didn't realize this when I pressed print. It's 60 pages long. So just to warn you. And also what we've done is gone to the Institutional Review Board. Don Long and I have been going through the policy, making these changes, and current practice now is to remove procedures from the policy. And so that's what all these other documents are in this folder, are procedures, standard operating procedures related to different aspects of the policy. And so each of those is a separate document which will get separate approvals, and the idea is that procedures are much easier to modify than policy. The policy is going to have to be approved by the chancellor, so that's not something I can readily get accomplished. So anyway, that's why there's so many documents here. I just had a faculty member talk to me today, check that she could access the folder. Said, what document should I look at? So the main document is this policy revision here. Okay, we're open for comments until November 5th. I know it's not a lot of time, but the federal law goes into effect January, so we need to move forward here. So what are, and stop me anytime, I used to teach, so I'm used to interacting with students, so be glad to stop and at any time and answer any questions. So does the activity involve research? So the process for reviewing your research, and you can do this self-assessment beforehand before you submit it to the IRB for review, because that can help you determine which way to submit it to the IRB. So the first question we look at when we do a review is to determine, is the activity actually research? And the federal guideline, federal rules, common rule, which applies to 39 different agencies, including National Institutes of Health, they have a definition of research. You may or may not agree with that definition of research. You may think you're doing research and it doesn't fit their definition. If I say you're not doing research, I'm not making a judgment about your work. I'm just saying, for purposes of institutional review, we're only going to look at research that meets this definition. And the definition really hasn't changed since like 91 or whenever they came up with the common rule. Systematic investigation, so not just a one-off case study, for example. Designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So what's the intent? How are you doing the project, and what's the intent of the project? And note, it doesn't say designed to be published. So publication or not publication is not the definition of is this research that needs to be reviewed or not. There are certainly things you can publish that don't require human subjects review. And then there's research you do that might not ever get to publication, but would still need protections. There was a change. They added some clarifying language to say what is definitely not research. And so some of our colleagues in history, for example, here's from history, will be happy, right? So if your project is about a biography, for example, or you're going to write a newspaper article, that's considered not research by this definition. And then these other categories really don't affect us because we don't usually do projects with the police or Homeland Security or something like that. So there's a flow chart to show how your project is going to be reviewed. And the first question is it research? If it's not research, you don't have to submit it to the IRB. However, sometimes your journal will ask you for proof that your research was reviewed by the IRB and approved. So if we've determined that you're not doing research, we don't have to review it, I can issue an official letter saying we've determined this is not research, so you can meet your journal requirements. That yes, it's been reviewed. They said it's not research by this definition. The next question is it human subjects research? Because the whole purpose of this program is to protect the human subjects of the research. So to be defined as a human subject, the subject has to be a living individual. So again, a lot of history would be not research under this definition. And then is there an interaction with the subject? And what they added was I think I have a clicker here. So
is this going to work? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. What they added was about biospecimens. So biochemical, medical research. You might have a specimen from a living person. So that would need to be that person's rights would need to be protected. Identifiable private information is another key part of this. Now this is an or, so you could have unidentified information that you obtain directly from the person, so that would again be considered human subjects research. So, so that's the first, or I guess the second question. Is it research? Is it human subjects? Is it exempt? So exempt means a specific thing in the common rule. And the new common rule has 8 possible exemptions, so we'll go through what those are. And we'll just go ahead and, you may or may not be familiar. I wasn't as familiar with the old common rule. I started human subject research as a chemistry educator, so I had a little interaction with IRB and these rules, but last year was when I really started sitting in on IRB and learning about this. So for me, this is all new, so we just skip to what are the new rules going to be. So normal educational practices. So a lot of times faculty ask, especially UIS, we're primarily a teaching institution, right? So I'm doing a project that I want to find out how effective is my teaching. So is that considered research? It could be, right? You could approach it systematically. It clearly involves human subjects. Your students are living individuals. But if it's just normal quality improvement kind of activity, I want to see, I tried something new in my class this year, I want to see if it works so that next year I can do a better job. That would be just normal education practice, as long as it's not going to adversely impact the students. It would be exempt. Yeah, maybe.
So like action research would require an application?
Okay, so exempt still needs to be looked at by the IRB.
Okay.
So we have a form. So if you look at these and say, oh, my research should be exempt, you fill out our exempt form, and then we say, yes, your research is exempt from review by the full board. It doesn't mean it's exempt from anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So can I follow up on that
Yeah.
question? Can research be exempt that collects, confidential information about students?
It can be. It can be. Yeah, we'll look at that. So I think it's going to be exemption 3 or 4. We'll look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a change?
That is a change. Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. I think this is actually maybe related to your question. So, exemption, you're working with anonymized data, or de-identified data. You cannot readily be linked back to the subject. So they added that language about readily because in the internet age, right, nothing is truly private. A hacker could have actually figured everything out about you, right? So we can't be expected to protect at that level. But it's like, if you can't just do a quick Google search and find out, oh, this student did this and this and this, then it's not readily available. So that'd be considered de-identified or anonymized data. Or it is identifiable, but minimal risk. No potential harms beyond normal living risks. So there would have to be protections, for example, if you're doing research with your students, that their status, their grade, your evaluation of the performance in the class will not be impacted by this study. And so to ensure that those harms are minimal, there's a new review option called the IRB limited review. And so we're going to go ahead and implement this because we think this is going to help faculty do their projects. So it's going to be a review that's going to look at the privacy and confidentiality protection. So it's not looking at all the review criteria. Is this research allowed? It's looking specifically at that question. Okay, I'm interviewing my students about my class, so I know who they are. but will their data be protected? Will it not affect the grade, for example? Let's not worry about what was. There's a new exemption, benign behavioral intervention. I was at training this last week. There's lively discussion about what does this mean? What does prospectively agree mean? Oops. So, again, you could get identifiable information under a protocol that's considered exempt as long as it undergoes limited review to try to protect the privacy and confidentiality of the subjects. So you could do video or audio recordings, right? Because that is identifiable, but as long as you protect that, you can do this research under this exemption. So you can see why we're going to go ahead and do the limited review, because this is going to open up a lot of options for people. And then there are definitions of what benign means: brief, harmless, painless, non-invasive, not likely to have significant adverse lasting impacts, and you think they won't find the intervention offensive or embarrassing. And they will issue some guidelines, like 11 examples or 11 possible definitions of benign, and then they gave 9 examples. And a lot of the examples they give are like playing music during such and such activity. And as a musician, I think that might not be benign, right? What if that music is totally offensive to me, and so it really irritates me? So even though the federal rule is, oh, that's benign, our IRB might be a little more conservative on those things. So just consider that. So secondary research has almost always been exempt. So you can do secondary research on identifiable private information or biospecimens. Consent not required. So this, again, opens up more possibilities. The whole idea behind the revisions to the common rule are to make it easier for researchers to conduct research, open up more options, but while still protecting the human subjects. Okay, and we aren't actually equipped to do HIPAA review or HIPAA certification or HIPAA training. We're working on that now that there's actually a nursing program on our campus, though it's not our nursing program. We're working on trying to coordinate HIPAA training through them as needed. But in general, we're going to probably do reliance on another IRB, which is another push in the new common rule, which we'll talk about. This usually doesn't apply to us because it's federal research about public health, like if there's an outbreak of a disease, and that's going to be exempt. Public health officials can go in and do that research. And then taste and food has always been exempt. New exemptions is this identifiable private information or biospecimens. So you could collect samples for future other research, right? And then you could do this other research on these data that you collected if you have obtained broad consent. And I'm just going to warn you, we're not going to allow broad consent, so don't get too excited. And the reason is, in broad consent, this is a new concept, you're asking subjects, you're participating in a research project, we're also going to do other things to your data. And so are you okay with us doing anything with your data? You actually can't say that. You have to be a little more specific. You have to be able to go back and keep track of these individuals who have agreed to broad consent. And that whole infrastructure for doing that is beyond what we can do. And I found out at this workshop with people that from universities that have like 10 IRB staff that they're not doing it either. So don't shop around and try to find an IRB that's going to let you do this. It's going to be hard. But in explaining this, some people ask, well, I have data I've collected, right, say on my student project, my classroom project. And I'm done with that project. I still have the data, and all identities have been removed. I don't know who the students are. I can't go back and figure out who they are. Can I still use that data? And the answer is yes. And so you can still use data you collected for other purposes as long as it's been de-identified. And so you may not need broad consent after all. Okay, what is limited IRB review? Again, our IRB is going to have to do these to allow you to take advantage of these new exemptions. And what we've decided to do was follow our procedure for expedited review, which means it does not go to full board. It goes to Don Long and I, and we sit and discuss and decide. So potentially it's faster. If it's complicated, it could still take a long time. It could still take a lot of back and forth with the investigator to get everything clarified. So exempt or expedited or limited does not equal fast, but it could be faster than full board. Okay, now they've broadened the exemptions because you want to help facilitate research, but you still want to protect the human subject. So some of the exemptions don't apply for vulnerable subjects. And so that's what this chart shows here, that basically if children are involved, most of the exemptions can't be used. You have to go to full board and remove children. If prisoners are involved, you have to go to full board unless you aren't targeting prisoners. So you send out a survey and prisoners could participate in the survey, but you're not targeting the survey, the prisoners, they're just included in the general population, then that could be exempt. Okay, so we've gone through this review process, right? So we figured out it's research, it involves human subjects. We looked at all these different exemption categories, and on the exemption form, you can go in and say, I think my research is exempt under category 2, and here's why. So that would help us when Don and I sit down to review it, like, oh, they said 2, okay, yeah, we agree, or if we think it's 3, we can make that revision. And then, if it is exempt, under some of the exemption categories, it will require a limited IRB review. It's not exempt, oops. Oh, if it doesn't need limited review, it can just be approved right away. If it is not exempt, it has to go to either expedited or full board review. Any questions about that process? Yeah.
So that's how, what you just last said, that's how it's determined if it goes to the full board, if we mark the exemptions. Otherwise, does it automatically just go to the 2 of you?
So so the process is all IRB applications go to Don Long initially. There's a pre-screening process that we use in our office to determine is it exempt, is it expedited, or does it need to go full board. And we have 2 application forms. We have an exempt application form, which is you use if you think your research is exempt, and then if you're not sure, there's a full application. And so this is to help you think about how to apply for your research review. But then this also, so you can see this is what we're going to do when it gets to our office for the pre-screening. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Laura.
Okay, so I have a question. Let's say you have a research idea that uses archival data that is identifiable. You were not foresightful enough to get consent at the time the data was collected for
Yeah, so it depends on what your intent using that data. So for example, now we're working on institutional research projects where we're looking at identifiable student data and doing research like if they use the dorms on the weekends, does that improve their GPA? So that is a institutional research, that's a program review, that is not considered in-subject research. So, but if you were intending to generate generalizable knowledge, all students in the world who ever say they're interested in such and such have these outcomes or something.
Well,
Then
you never said that, right? So
then
what you could
then
say
you have to
is-
go back and consent them. Right.
So you have to go track down the students and answer them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry. That's part of
There is a world
the
between
protection.
all students and
Right.
just the institution.
Right.
But
Are
Yes.
you demonstrating your belief that it's generalizable when you publish or your intent to publish? Is that?
So that may indicate it's generalizable, right? So one definition, I'm not sure how we have defined in our policy about what generalizable knowledge is, but one definition of it is right to make scientific progress, right? So and that could be intent to publish because you're making progress in science, and part of that you have to disseminate that so other scientists can build on that knowledge. So that is part of the intent, yeah, for generalizable knowledge.
Yeah, so it's similar, I guess, to the old rules in the sense that if you're going to be sharing, publishing, presenting off of this data.
Right, that part hasn't changed. The definition of research hasn't changed. Right. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Yes, someone.
Let's assume I have a survey approved by the IRB here in Davis. And a government agency asked me to give them the survey for their internal use. Should I modify?
Ask Don. So, that's a real specific question. I'm not sure off the top of my head the answer to that. So,
And without having a better understanding their intended use of the information, I'd be hesitant to tell you yes or no. I mean, it could go either way.
So if I get this contract, then I will contact you. This is
Right.
yeah, I think that would be there's
this way.
specific things like that we can do one-on-one and process it that way.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, informed consent is also changing, and they talk about key information that needs to be presented first in the consent document, or in the consent discussion if you're doing a verbal consent. So we kind of already have that in our checklist, our template, so that hasn't changed that much, but the question is, what is the key information essential to decision making? And the standard now is what a reasonable person would want to have. So if you find a reasonable person, please let me know. We'll bring him into our office and review all of these, right? So
only with their consent.
yeah, we need their consent to do this, right? So part of it is in a understandable language for the context of the human subject. What reasons why to participate and reasons why not to participate is kind of the guidelines so far. We put on our on our informed consent web page, we put a link to a free engine that will search your document and determine whether it meets 8th grade reading level, which is considered general population reading level. But maybe what is your context? What is your subject pool? It might not be general population. It's children, then 8th grade is not appropriate, right? signing, or do you need to communicate orally? So that's part of the decision making in this informed consent document. They did add electronic signatures are allowed, and actually they added a definition of written in the rule. Written can include electronic. So they are like, oh, we're in the 21st century now. We need to accommodate this. Concise and focused presentation. There's still an option. You can waive consent requirement, and you can waive the requirement of documentation of consent. So collecting of signatures, for example, sometimes you need to waive that, because if you're doing an anonymous survey, that would totally defeat the purpose. But there's a form you have to fill out for that. If you need to waive the requirement for obtaining signature, they added a category that if the subjects are members of a distinct cultural group or community in which signing forms is not the norm. So to be culturally sensitive, you're going to waive the consent document because that's not appropriate for that culture. So those are some new rules or new guidelines for the consent document, and we have a checklist. We don't have a template yet. We're going to try to work on a template because people always ask for templates. But the problem with providing a template is we might have language that is not appropriate for your population, and so don't feel like you have to use that language, or cut and paste and like create a huge document to try to meet every single little thing. Okay. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this handout comes from the modules on city, so that they have training on all of these changes to the federal rules, so you can get familiar with these new exemption categories, how to put an informed consent together, and that's free through our subscription to City. Okay, other changes. We added a section to the policy about international research. That has become more prevalent. And I added a web page with a checklist on if you're doing international research, these are things you need to consider in addition to the regular requirements. And part of that discussion is what changes at EU. So this law applies to anyone residing in this area. So does not apply to an EU citizen on our campus. It does apply to a UIS, an American citizen, who goes on study abroad to Europe. Now, while they're in Europe, this applies to them. Also, if you do a YouTube survey, for example, so it's out on the interwebs, and anyone around the world could click on it. Someone residing in the EU might click on your survey, and now that law applies to them. So we haven't posted these yet because they're drafted, but there's a U of I-wide group working on research implications of this law that went into effect last year, including different types of templates. So, for example, if you're doing that YouTube survey, you're not targeting European Union residents. There's some language you can put in your consent document. If you are targeting European Union residents, then you need a different template because you need more specific language. So there's some examples we'll have on our webpage eventually. But meanwhile, if you're in that situation, please contact Don or I, and we can help provide guidance on that. Okay. Questions? Discussion? The floor is open.
The list and explanation of exemptions is in the policy that's in the draft folder?
It's in the draft policy, yes.